My daughter banned me from her wedding with a single text, "Mom, please don't come. You'll only make things harder." After everything I sacrificed for her, that was all I got. But I still drove 6 hours to Chicago. I didn't come to ruin her day. I just wanted to see her, my little girl, walk down the aisle, even if I had to stand outside in the cold. And that's exactly where I was. Invisible, unwanted, until the groom suddenly grabbed the microphone and said, "Before we begin, why is the bride's mother standing outside?" And in that moment, the entire church went silent. If this already hits something deep in your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me through this story. Go ahead and like the video if you believe a mother's love should never be ignored. Subscribe if you enjoy emotional real-life family stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I read every single one. My name is Angela Campbell, and for most of my life, I didn't think of myself as strong. I just thought I was doing what any mother would do. But looking back now, I realize there are things I survived that I never should have had to face alone. My husband David died when our daughter Chloe was just 8 years old. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. I still remember the sound of the knock on the door, 2 police officers standing there, hats in their hands, their faces already carrying the answer before they spoke a single word. Construction accident. Instant. No suffering, they said. As if that made it easier. In one moment, my life split in two. Before and after. Before I was a wife. After I was just a mother trying not to fall apart. I didn't have time to grieve the way I needed to. Chloe needed me. She stood behind me that day, clutching the hem of my sweater, asking in a trembling voice, "Mom, what's happening?" And I remember turning around, kneeling in front of her, forcing a smile through tears that wouldn't stop coming. "It's going to be okay, baby," I told her, even though I had no idea how. From that day on, everything became about survival. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital in Columbus, Ohio. At first, I picked up extra shifts just to stay afloat. Then extra turned into constant. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, weekends. I learned how to function on 2 hours of sleep and a cup of stale coffee. There were nights I would come home just as Chloe was waking up for school. I'd kiss her forehead, pack her lunch with shaking hands, and then collapse into bed the second she walked out the door. And still, it never felt like enough. Money was always tight. There were months I had to choose between fixing the heater or paying for Chloe's school supplies. Winters in Ohio aren't forgiving, but neither is watching your child feel different from everyone else because her shoes are worn out or her backpack is secondhand. I remember one Christmas when Chloe was about 10. She had her heart set on a pink bicycle she saw in a store window. I told her we'd see what Santa could do, even though I already knew there was no way I could afford it. That December, I picked up every extra shift I could find. I worked Christmas Eve overnight, helping deliver someone else's baby while missing my own child opening gifts at home. When I finally walked through our front door that morning, exhausted and smelling like antiseptic, Chloe ran up to me and threw her arms around my waist. "Mom, Santa came," she said, her eyes shining. And there it was, that pink bicycle leaning slightly to one side because I'd bought it secondhand and fixed it myself in the hospital parking lot between shifts. She didn't notice the scratches. She didn't see the uneven paint. All she saw was magic. "You did this, didn't you?" she whispered later, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. I laughed softly. "What, you don't believe in Santa anymore?" She pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes and said something I will never forget. "I believe in you." That was Chloe back then, my Chloe. She was kind, grateful, loving in a way that made every sacrifice feel small. When she was in middle school, she used to wait up for me on the couch even if it was past midnight. I'd walk in and there she'd be wrapped in a blanket pretending she hadn't fallen asleep. "Did you eat?" she'd ask me. Imagine that. A child worrying about her mother. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And for a long time, that was enough. As Chloe grew older, she worked hard in school. I pushed her maybe too much sometimes, but I wanted her to have choices, real choices. Not the kind where you're just picking the least painful option. She got into a good college in Boston. I still remember the day the acceptance letter came. She screamed so loud, the neighbors probably thought something terrible had happened. "Mom, I did it, I got in," she cried, jumping into my arms. I held her tightly, my heart swelling with pride and something else I didn't want to name. Fear. Because I knew things were about to change. The night before she left, we sat at the kitchen table, the same old table where we'd shared countless late-night meals and quiet conversations. Her suitcase was already packed. "I'm going to make you proud, Mum," she said, her voice soft but determined. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You already have," I told her. And I meant it. What I didn't say, what I couldn't say, was how scared I was that the world would take her away from me in ways I couldn't fight. College was the first step. A bigger world, new people, new expectations. A world where I didn't belong. At first she called every day, then every other day, then once a week. I told myself that was normal, that it meant she was growing, becoming independent. That's what I wanted, right? But little things started to change. Her voice sounded different, not just older, but distant. She started correcting the way I spoke sometimes. "Mum, people don't really say it like that," she'd laugh lightly. Or she'd comment on things I wore. "You should try something more modern," she suggested, once her tone casual, but her words lingering longer than she probably intended. I brushed it off. Kids change. That's what they do. But deep down, there was a quiet ache I couldn't ignore. The first time she didn't come home for Thanksgiving, she said she had other plans. The second time, she didn't even ask if I was cooking. By then, I had learned how to sit alone at a table, meant for two. Still, whenever she did come home, she was sweet in her own way. She hugged me, told me she missed me, but there was something measured about it. Like she was trying to fit me into a version of her life that no longer quite matched who we used to be. I remember one evening not long after her sophomore year. We were sitting on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees. She looked at me, studying my face in a way that made me suddenly self-conscious. "Mom, do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" she asked. I smiled, even though the question caught me off guard. "Of course," I said honestly. "But I wouldn't change having you, not for anything." She nodded slowly, but her eyes drifted away as if she was thinking about something else entirely. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. My daughter was stepping into a life that I didn't understand, and maybe didn't include me the way it used to. I just didn't know yet how far that distance would grow, or how much it would cost us both. I didn't meet Ethan Carter until nearly a year after Chloe started dating him. By then, his name had already become a regular part of our conversations, though conversations might not be the right word anymore. They were shorter now, more selective, like Chloe was editing pieces of her life before sharing them with me. His family's really well known, she told me once over the phone. They've been in finance for decades. I remember smiling, trying to sound genuinely interested. "That's wonderful, honey. And what about him? What's he like?" There was a pause, just a second too long. "He's different," she said finally, in a good way. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but when I finally met Ethan, I understood exactly what she meant. It was during a weekend I flew out to Boston to visit her. I saved up for months for that trip, picked up extra shifts, skipped small comforts, all for a couple of days with my daughter. Chloe chose the restaurant. It wasn't the kind of place I was used to. White tablecloths, soft lighting, men in tailored suits, women who looked like they belonged in magazines. I remember standing outside for a moment, smoothing down my dress, suddenly aware of every wrinkle, every sign of wear. When I walked in, Chloe was already there with Ethan. She looked radiant, confident in a way I hadn't seen before. Her hair perfectly styled, her posture straight, her smile polished. For a brief moment, I forgot everything else. I just saw my little girl all grown up. "Mum," she said, standing quickly to hug me. But even in that hug, something felt different, lighter, faster, like she didn't want to wrinkle her dress. "Mum, this is Ethan," she said, turning toward him. He stood up, extending his hand with a warm, steady smile. "Mrs. Campbell, it's really nice to finally meet you," he said. His voice was calm, respectful. His eyes met mine without hesitation. I liked him immediately. "Please call me Angela," I replied. We sat down, and for a while things felt almost normal. Ethan asked me about my work about Ohio, about how Chloe was as a child. And unlike some people, he actually listened, leaning forward, asking follow-up questions, smiling at the right moments. At one point, I told a story about Chloe trying to bandage her stuffed animals when she was little, pretending to be a nurse like me. Ethan laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like her," he said. Chloe smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh my God, Mum, that was forever ago," she said quickly, glancing around the restaurant as if worried someone might hear. "It's just a cute story," I said gently. "I know," she replied, but her tone had shifted tight, almost defensive. That was the first moment I felt it clearly, not just distance, embarrassment. The rest of the dinner continued, but something subtle had changed. Chloe spoke more when Ethan wasn't listening, correcting small things I said, or redirecting the conversation when it veered too close to our past. When the check came, I instinctively reached for my purse, but Ethan beat me to it. "Please," he said with a smile. "I've got this." I hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. And that was that. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the pavement. Chloe hugged me goodbye, but again it was quick. "Text me when you get back to your hotel, okay?" she said. "I will." I promised. Ethan shook my hand again, then surprised me by pulling me into a brief, respectful hug. "It was really good meeting you, Angela," he said. "You too," I replied honestly. As I walked away, I turned once to look back. They were standing close together, Chloe laughing at something Ethan said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked happy. And I told myself that was all that mattered. But over the next few months, things began to shift more noticeably. Chloe started mentioning Ethan's family more often. "They have this summer house on the lake," she said once. "His mom hosts these incredible charity events. Everything is just so different there." Her voice carried a kind of wonder I hadn't heard before. At first, I was glad she was experiencing new things, but slowly that wonder turned into comparison, and I began to realize I was on the losing side of it. The first time I heard the name Victoria Carter Chloe's tone changed. "She's very particular," Chloe said carefully, "about what I asked. Everything," she replied with a small laugh. "Presentation manners, how you speak, how you dress. I tried to keep my voice light. Sounds like she knows what she wants." Chloe didn't respond right away. "She just has standards," she said finally. Standards. That word lingered long after the call ended. The next time Chloe came home to Ohio, I noticed the changes immediately. Her clothes were more expensive, more structured. Her makeup was subtle but precise. Even the way she sat at the table, straight-backed, composed, felt rehearsed. We were eating dinner when she glanced around the kitchen. "Mom, have you ever thought about updating this place?" she asked. I looked up, surprised. "Updating, yeah. I mean, it's just a little outdated," she said, choosing her words carefully. I followed her gaze. The worn cabinets, the slightly faded curtains, the table that had seen better days. "This house raised you," I said quietly. "I know," she replied quickly. "I just mean things could be nicer." Nicer. I nodded slowly, even though something inside me tightened. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone. I know she was saying softly, "It's just different here." A pause. "No, she's fine. She just doesn't really get it." I didn't need to hear the rest. I went back to my room and closed the door quietly, as if making noise would somehow make it worse. That was the first night I cried over something my daughter didn't even realize she had done. From that point on, every visit felt like walking on unfamiliar ground. Chloe still smiled, still hugged me, but there was a distance between us now, thin, invisible, but impossible to ignore. And then one evening, she called me with news that should have been one of the happiest moments of our lives. "Mom," she said, her voice bright, almost breathless. "Ethan proposed." I sat down slowly, my heart swelling with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "That's wonderful." "It was perfect," she said. "His whole family was there. It was beautiful." I waited for her to say she wished I had been there, but she didn't. Instead, she added, "His mom is already helping plan the wedding." Of course she was. I smiled into the phone even though Chloe couldn't see it. "I'm happy for you," I said. And I meant it. I just didn't realize yet how much that happiness would cost me. A week after Chloe told me about the engagement, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was from Victoria Carter. Her voice was smooth polished like everything about her. There was no warmth in it, but no open hostility either. Just control. "Angela, I thought it would be nice if we had lunch," she said. "Just the two of us." I hesitated for half a second. Part of me knew this wasn't really an invitation. It was something else, something quieter, sharper. But I said yes, because she was going to be my daughter's mother-in-law. And I wanted to try. We met at a restaurant downtown in Chicago, one of those places where everything feels curated, the lighting, the music, even the way the staff moved. Nothing was accidental. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I'm the kind of person who likes to impress, but because I didn't want to be late. Not today. Victoria was already seated when I walked in. Of course she was. She stood as I approached, offering a small, practiced smile. "Angela," she said, extending her hand. "Victoria," I replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm, her nails perfectly manicured, her posture effortless. Everything about her said one thing: control. We sat down, and for a few minutes we talked about safe things: the weather, the wedding venue, Chloe and Ethan. "She looks beautiful these days," Victoria said, casually sipping her water. "She's always been beautiful," I replied. Victoria smiled faintly, as if humoring me. "Yes, but now she's becoming something more refined." Refined. There was that word again, dressed differently, but carrying the same weight. I kept my expression neutral. "I'm glad she's happy," I said. The waiter came, took our orders, and left. And just like that, the tone shifted. Victoria placed her napkin neatly in her lap and leaned forward slightly. "I wanted to talk to you privately because there are a few things we should clarify before the wedding." My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Of course." She studied me for a moment, her eyes scanning in a way that felt less like observation and more like evaluation. "You have to understand," she began, her voice calm, measured. "The Carter family has a certain reputation to maintain." I didn't respond. I just listened. "This wedding will be attended by people who are very particular, business partners, long-standing friends, people who notice details." Her eyes met mine directly now, and first impressions matter. There it was, the moment where politeness peeled away just enough to reveal what was underneath. "I see," I said quietly. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "I'm sure you do." Silence settled between us for a second. Then she continued. "Chloe is stepping into a different world now, one that comes with expectations, standards. Standards. That word again. And while she loves you, of course," Victoria added lightly, "there are certain aspects of her background that could complicate things if not handled carefully." I felt something inside me shift, not break, not yet, just tighten. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking," I said, even though I had a feeling I already did. Victoria smiled, soft, patient, almost kind. But it wasn't kindness. It was strategy. "I'm asking for your cooperation," she said. "In what way?" She folded her hands neatly on the table. "For the ceremony, we believe it would be best if you didn't sit in the front row." The words landed softly, but they hit hard. "I'm her mother," I said. "Yes," Victoria replied smoothly, "and that won't change. But appearances are delicate. We've arranged seating that reflects the overall tone of the event." I swallowed. "And what tone is that? Elegant, cohesive, elevated?" Every word felt like it had been chosen long before I walked into that restaurant, and me sitting in the front row would disrupt that, I asked quietly. Victoria didn't hesitate. It could draw attention in ways we'd prefer to avoid. There it was, clearer now, sharper. I looked down at my hands for a moment, hands that had worked double shifts, hands that had held my daughter when she cried, hands that had built a life from nothing. And suddenly, they felt out of place. "I understand," I said slowly, even though I didn't. Victoria nodded as if we had just agreed on something perfectly reasonable. "There's also the matter of speeches," she continued. I looked up again. "What about them?" "We've decided to keep the program very streamlined," she said. "Only a few selected speakers. Close family, of course." I let out a small breath. "And I'm not considered close family." She gave me a look that was almost apologetic. "In this context, we're focusing on a specific presentation. Presentation." That word felt colder than the rest. I sat back in my chair, trying to steady the rising wave inside me. "And is Chloe aware of all of this?" I asked. Victoria's expression didn't change. "Chloe trusts us to guide her through this process," she said. That wasn't an answer. Not really, but it told me enough. I nodded slowly. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Victoria hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then she said, "We would also appreciate it if you kept your interactions limited during the reception." I blinked. My interactions? Yes. Circulating too much could create unnecessary attention. I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. "You want me to be invisible?" Victoria didn't flinch. "I want the day to go smoothly," she corrected. For a moment, I just sat there. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. All I could hear was the echo of her words. Invisible, unnecessary, unrefined. And yet, beneath all of that, there was one thought that refused to go away. This wasn't just about her. This was about my daughter, about Chloe, the little girl who once told me she believed in me. I lifted my head and met Victoria's gaze. "If that's what it takes for Chloe to have the wedding she wants," I said quietly, "then I'll do it." Victoria smiled, not warmly, not gratefully, just satisfied. "I knew you'd understand," she said. Lunch continued after that, but I don't remember much of it. The food, the conversation, the way the afternoon light shifted across the table, none of it stayed with me. What stayed was the feeling that something sacred had been reduced to a performance, and I had just agreed to play the smallest role in it. When I left the restaurant, I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the city rushing past me like I wasn't even there. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to Chloe's name, and stared at it. I wanted to call her, to ask her if this was really what she wanted, if she knew, if she cared. But my finger hovered over the screen and then slowly pulled away. Because deep down, I was afraid of the answer. I didn't call Chloe that night. I told myself it was because she was busy with wedding planning, because she was overwhelmed, because I didn't want to add more pressure. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid that if I asked her directly, she would confirm everything Victoria had just said. Afraid that the distance I'd been feeling for months wasn't something I had imagined, but something she had already accepted. So I waited. Days passed. Then a week. Chloe didn't bring up the lunch, not once. We spoke briefly on the phone about invitations, flowers, seating charts, but never about me. Never about where I would sit, or if I would speak, or how I would be part of the most important day of her life. It was like I had already been quietly edited out of the story. And then one evening, everything became undeniable. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through a stack of bills when my phone buzzed, a message from Chloe. For a split second, my heart lifted. I smiled automatically the way I always did when I saw her name. Maybe this was it, I thought. Maybe she was finally going to talk to me, really talk to me. I opened the message, and just like that, everything inside me went still. Mom, please don't come to the wedding. It will only make things harder for everyone. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no, I love you. Just a sentence that felt like a door slamming shut. I read it again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something softer, something I could understand. But they didn't. My hands started to shake. I typed a response before I could stop myself. What do you mean, Chloe? I stared at the screen, watching the little delivered notification appear. Then I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. No reply. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. Hi, it's Chloe. I can't get to the phone right now, but leave a message. Her voice sounded cheerful, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Chloe, it's Mum, I said after the beep, my voice already unsteady. I just got your message and I don't understand. Can you call me back, please? I hung up and sat there, my phone still in my hand. The kitchen felt too quiet, too empty. I looked around at the same walls that had witnessed our entire life together, the late-night talks, the laughter, the arguments, the moments that built everything between us, and suddenly it all felt irrelevant. Another hour passed before my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. I just think it's better this way. Please respect my decision. Better. For who? I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. I typed back slowly, carefully, as if choosing the right words might somehow fix this. Did I do something wrong? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately this time, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response came through. No, Mom. It's just complicated. You wouldn't understand. Something inside me broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, clean break like something fragile finally giving up. I'm your mother, I typed. Help me understand. There was a longer pause this time, long enough for hope to creep in even if I didn't want it to. Then her answer came. It's about image, Mum, about how things look. Ethan's family has expectations, and I need everything to go smoothly. I can't have anything unexpected happen. Unexpected. I read that word over and over again, as if I had somehow become a risk, a variable, something unpredictable that needed to be removed. I wouldn't do anything to ruin your day, I replied quickly. You know that. I know, she said. And then, but it's not just about what you would do, it's about how things might be perceived. Perceived. I felt my throat tighten. "So you're ashamed of me?" I asked. The message sat there for a long time, minutes stretched into something heavier. When her reply finally came, it wasn't an answer. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." That was it. No denial, no reassurance, just avoidance. I set my phone down slowly on the table. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there staring at nothing, trying to hold myself together. My mind kept replaying memories Chloe as a child. Chloe laughing, Chloe hugging me, Chloe telling me I was her hero. And then that message. "Please don't come." I don't remember when I started crying, only that I did. Quietly at first, then harder until I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep the sound from filling the room. I cried for the little girl she used to be. I cried for the woman she had become. And I cried for the space between those two versions of her, where I no longer seemed to exist. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a headache that felt like it had settled deep into my bones. For a moment, I let myself believe it had been a dream, that I would check my phone and see something different. But when I picked it up, the message was still there, unchanged, final. I made coffee even though I didn't want it, sat at the table, tried to think. I could stay home. I could respect her wishes. I could pretend that this was what a good mother was supposed to do, step aside, disappear, make things easier. But every time I tried to accept that, something inside me pushed back. Not anger, not pride, just love. The kind of love that doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. I didn't want to ruin her day. I didn't want to embarrass her. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just wanted to see her. Just once. In her wedding dress. Walking down the aisle. Becoming someone's wife. My little girl. Taking that step into a new life. Was that really too much to ask? I stood up slowly and walked to my bedroom. Opened the closet, and there it was, the dress I had bought weeks ago. Simple, elegant, blue, not too flashy, not too plain. Something I had chosen carefully, imagining how it would feel to sit in that church watching her. I reached out and touched the fabric lightly. For a moment, I considered putting it back, closing the door, letting it all go. But instead, I took it down, laid it carefully on the bed, and in that quiet room with no one there to hear me, I whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud before. "I'm still your mother, not to argue, not to fight, just to remind myself." Because somewhere along the way, I had started to feel like I needed permission to exist in her life. And maybe I didn't. Maybe showing up didn't have to mean causing harm. Maybe it could just mean being there, even if it was from a distance, even if no one noticed, even if I had to stand outside. I looked at the dress again, then at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time since that message arrived, I made a decision. I was going to Chicago, not to be seen, not to be acknowledged, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The morning I left for Chicago, the sky over Columbus was still dark. I didn't turn on all the lights in the house, just the small lamp in the kitchen, the same one I used on early shifts years ago when Chloe was still asleep and I would move quietly so I wouldn't wake her. Some habits never leave you. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though my stomach felt too tight to hold anything. The silence in the house was heavier than usual, as if it knew something was about to change. I stood there for a long moment looking around. The worn table, the old cabinets, the chair Chloe used to sit in swinging her legs when she was too small for them to touch the floor. So many pieces of her still lived here, even if she didn't anymore. "I'm not going to cause trouble," I whispered to no one in particular. "I just want to see her." Saying it out loud made it feel real, simple, almost reasonable. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and grabbed my keys. The drive to Chicago was a little over 6 hours. I had made that trip once before years ago when Chloe first moved away. Back then, it had been filled with excitement, nervous laughter, and the bittersweet feeling of letting go. This time, it felt different, heavier. The highway stretched out in front of me, long and quiet, the kind of road that gives you too much time to think. And I did. I thought about every version of Chloe I had known. The little girl who clung to my hand on her first day of school, the teenager who stayed up late studying at the kitchen table, the young woman who left for college promising she would always call, and the person she was now, a woman who had asked her own mother not to come to her wedding. I tried not to dwell on that last thought. Instead, I focused on something else, what I would do when I got there. I had already decided I wouldn't go inside unless I was invited. I wouldn't argue, wouldn't make a scene. I would stand at a distance, maybe near the entrance, maybe across the street, just enough to see her arrive, just enough to know she was okay, that she was happy, that everything we had been through had led her to something good. That was all I wanted. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The closer I got to Chicago, the more the traffic thickened, the city rising in the distance like something solid and immovable. By the time I reached my hotel, a small place a few blocks from the church, the sun was already high. I checked in quietly, avoiding eye contact with the receptionist more than necessary. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked older than I felt. Or maybe I just felt older than I used to. I unpacked slowly, hung the blue dress carefully in the closet, smoothed out the fabric with my hands, as if doing so might smooth out everything else too. The wedding was the next morning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chloe's message, heard her words, felt that same hollow space opening up in my chest. By the time dawn came, I was already awake. I showered, got dressed, and stood in front of the mirror for longer than I expected. The dress fit well, simple, clean, respectful. Not the kind of thing that would draw attention. Exactly what Victoria had wanted. A part of me almost laughed at that. Even after everything, I was still trying not to stand out. I brushed my hair, applied a light touch of makeup, then stepped back. For a moment, I didn't see a stranger. I saw a woman who had lived a life, who had loved deeply, who had given everything she had to someone else, and who was now standing here hoping that was enough. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," I said softly to my reflection. Then I picked up my purse and left the room. The church was larger than I expected. White stone walls, tall windows, a long set of steps leading up to the entrance. Beautiful, elegant, everything Victoria had described. There were already people arriving, well-dressed guests, moving in small groups, their voices light, their laughter easy. I stayed at the edge of the parking area for a moment, watching. No one noticed me. Of course they didn't. I took a slow breath and started walking. Step by step, I moved closer to the entrance, my heart beating louder with each one. I wasn't sure what I expected, that someone might recognize me, that Chloe might suddenly appear and change her mind, that anything would make this easier, but none of that happened. Instead, as I reached the bottom of the steps, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. "Ma'am, may I see your invitation?" he asked politely. I froze for just a second. I'm the bride's mother," I said. He hesitated, his expression shifting slightly. "One moment, please." He stepped aside, pulling out a tablet, scrolling through something. I stood there feeling the eyes of a few nearby guests drift toward me, then away again. After a moment, he looked back up. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Your name isn't on the list." My chest tightened. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly. "I'm Angela Campbell. Chloe Bennett is my daughter." He checked again, longer this time, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's a note here. You're not permitted to enter." Not permitted. The words landed heavier than anything before. Not permitted, I repeated. His voice softened slightly. I don't make the rules, ma'am. I'm just following instructions. Instructions? I didn't need to ask who they came from. I nodded slowly. I understand, I said, even though I didn't. He gave me a sympathetic look, then stepped back to his position. And just like that, I was outside. Not just physically, but completely. I moved away from the entrance, finding a spot near the side of the building where I could still see the doors. The air was colder than I expected, or maybe it was just me. Guests continued to arrive, walking past me without a second glance. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stay warm, trying to stay steady. This was what I had prepared for. I told myself that. I wasn't here to be included. I wasn't here to take up space. I was here to watch, to witness, to be present, even if no one acknowledged it. Time passed slowly, too slowly. The sound of music drifted faintly from inside the church, soft at first, then clearer. The ceremony was starting. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining it. Chloe in her dress, walking down the aisle, holding her bouquet the way she used to hold my hand tight, like she was afraid to let go. A small broken smile touched my lips. I hope you're happy, I whispered. And I meant it. Even now, even here. Then, as I opened my eyes again, something shifted. Movement near the entrance, voices changing. And for a brief second, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel all morning. A flicker of something unexpected, something uncertain, like the story wasn't finished yet. I didn't understand at first what had changed. From where I stood, half hidden along the side of the church, I could only see pieces of movement through the glass doors, guests shifting in their seats, someone standing, then sitting again. It was subtle, but it was enough to pull my attention away from the quiet grief I had been trying so hard to hold together. I stepped a little closer, not enough to be noticed, just enough to see. Through the tall glass panels, I caught a glimpse of the front of the church, the altar, the rows of guests, the faint outline of Chloe in white. My heart tightened instantly. Even from a distance, I could recognize her, the way she stood, the way she held herself. For a moment, everything else faded. She looked beautiful, more beautiful than I had ever imagined. And for a second, I almost forgot where I was standing, almost forgot that I wasn't supposed to be there. Then I saw him, Ethan. He was standing at the front next to the officiant. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, but something about him didn't match the moment. He wasn't looking at Chloe. He wasn't smiling the way a groom usually does when his bride walks toward him. Instead, he was looking somewhere else, toward the back of the church, toward the doors, toward me. I froze. It didn't make sense. There were dozens of guests inside. Why would he be looking out here? But then his gaze sharpened, focusing. And in that instant, I knew. He saw me. I instinctively stepped back, my heart racing. No. This wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't here to be noticed. I turned slightly as if that might somehow erase me from his view, but it was too late. Inside, I saw him lean slightly toward the man standing beside him, his best man, I assumed, and say something quickly. The man frowned, confused. Ethan said something else more firmly this time. The best man nodded and slipped away from the front, moving down the aisle. My breath caught in my throat. What was he doing? This wasn't part of the plan. There wasn't supposed to be a plan. I was just supposed to stand here, quiet, invisible. That's what I had agreed to, what I had accepted. But now, something was shifting. I watched as the best man spoke to one of the event coordinators near the entrance. She looked surprised, then glanced toward the doors toward me. For a moment, our eyes met. And just like that, I felt exposed. seen in a way I hadn't prepared for. She whispered something back to him, shaking her head slightly. He said something again, more insistent this time, and then he turned and walked quickly back toward the front. Inside, the music had stopped. Completely. A low murmur began to spread through the room, guests leaning toward each other, whispering. Something was wrong. Even from outside, I could feel it. I took another step back, my instinct telling me to leave, to walk away before this became something bigger than I could control. Before I caused the very disruption Chloe had been so afraid of, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there caught between two instincts, run or stay. And then Ethan moved. He stepped forward closer to the microphone near the altar. The officiant looked at him confused. Chloe turned slightly, her expression uncertain. I couldn't hear what was being said inside, but I could see it. The tension, the hesitation, the shift in energy that had gone from quiet anticipation to something sharp and unpredictable. Ethan said something to the officiant. The officiant nodded slowly, though he looked unsure. Then Ethan reached out and took the microphone. The sound system crackled slightly. Even from outside, I could hear that. The murmur in the room faded, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. My heart began to pound. No, please. Don't do this. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't come here to be the reason everything fell apart. I just wanted to watch, that's all. But then, his voice carried through the speakers clear enough that even I could hear it from where I stood. Before we continue, every head inside the church turned toward him. I saw Chloe's face confused, tense. Victoria, seated in the front row, straightened immediately, her expression tightening. Ethan paused. Just for a second, long enough for the entire room to hold its breath. Then he said it. Why is the bride's mother standing outside? The words hit me like a physical force. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Inside, the reaction was instant. Heads turning, people looking around whispering, confusion spreading like a ripple through the crowd. Chloe went completely still, her face drained of color. Victoria's expression changed too, but not to confusion, to something sharper, controlled, but alarmed. And suddenly every part of me wanted to disappear. I took a step back, then another, my mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to be part of the story. I was supposed to be the background, the part no one noticed, but now I was the center of it, and I hadn't asked for that. I turned ready to leave, ready to walk away before things got worse. Before Chloe looked at me with that same distance, that same quiet rejection. But just as I reached the edge of the parking lot, I heard something else. The doors opening. I stopped. Slowly, I turned back. The large wooden doors of the church were being pushed open from the inside. Light spilled out onto the steps. And standing in the doorway was Ethan. For a second, everything went still. The noise, the movement, even the cold air seemed to pause. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning until they found me again. There was no hesitation in his expression now, no confusion, just certainty. And something else I hadn't expected. Respect. Angela, he called out, his voice carrying clearly. My name, spoken not with embarrassment, not with hesitation, but with recognition. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't heard my name said like that in a long time, not like it mattered. I shook my head slightly, instinctively. You don't have to do this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. He took a few steps down toward me. I think I do, he replied. Behind him, I could see movement, guests standing trying to see what was happening. Chloe was visible now too, just inside the doorway. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, shocked, uncertain. For a moment, we just stared at each other, everything unsaid hanging between us, all the distance, all the pain, all the love that hadn't disappeared, just gotten lost somewhere along the way. I didn't come to cause trouble, I said softly, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. I was just going to leave. Ethan stopped a few feet in front of me. No, he said gently. You weren't supposed to be outside in the first place. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made something shift inside me. For the first time that day, I didn't feel invisible, I felt seen. And I didn't know what to do with that. For a moment, neither of us moved. I stood there on the cold stone steps, my hands still wrapped tightly around myself, as if I needed something to hold me together. Ethan stood just a few feet away, steady, composed, but there was something different in his eyes now. Not just politeness, not just obligation, something deeper, something that told me he had already made up his mind. You don't understand, I said quietly, my voice unsteady. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying me, not in the way Victoria had, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet attention that made it hard to look away. Then maybe it's time we ask why, he replied. His words landed softly, but they carried a weight that made my chest tighten. Behind him, I could hear the low murmur of voices spilling out from the church, people shifting, whispering, trying to piece together what was happening. This was exactly what Chloe had been afraid of. Attention, disruption, a moment that didn't fit into the perfect image. I don't want to make things worse for her, I said, glancing toward the open doors. That's why I stayed outside. Ethan followed my gaze, then looked back at me. She told me you didn't want to come, he said. I let out a small, hollow breath. I never said that. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already begun to suspect. I didn't think you did. Silence settled between us again, but it wasn't empty this time. It was filled with something, unspoken questions that had been building long before today. I need to know what happened, he said gently, because right now none of this makes sense. I hesitated. This wasn't my place. This wasn't my moment. I had spent so long trying to stay out of the way, trying not to interfere, trying to be small. And now he was asking me to step into something I had been told I didn't belong in. I think you should ask Chloe, I said, finally. Ethan's expression shifted slightly, not frustrated, not impatient, but resolute. I will, he said. But I'm asking you first. Something in his tone made it clear. He wasn't going to let this go. I looked down at my hands again, at the faint tremble I still couldn't quite control. I was told, it would be better if I stayed in the background, I said slowly. Ethan frowned. By who? I hesitated for a fraction of a second. But there was no point pretending anymore. Your mother, I said. The words felt heavier once they were spoken out loud. Ethan didn't react immediately. He didn't look shocked or confused. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, as if something had just fallen into place. That's what I thought, he murmured. I looked up at him. You knew I suspected, he said. I just didn't realize how far it went. He turned slightly, glancing back toward the church where the murmurs had grown louder now. I need to confirm something, he added. Before I could respond, he stepped aside and motioned toward the doorway. Come with me. The words hit me harder than anything else had that day. I shook my head immediately. No, I can't. Why not? Because I'm not supposed to be in there, I said, the words coming out faster now, almost desperate. I've already caused enough. You didn't cause this, he interrupted, his voice firm but not harsh. I stopped. No one had said that to me before. Not once. Not even Chloe. Ethan took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. You were told to stay outside, he said. That's not the same as choosing it. The distinction was small, but it mattered, more than I expected. Still, I hesitated. Because stepping inside that church meant more than just walking through a door. It meant facing Chloe, facing the truth, facing the possibility that everything I feared might be real. "I don't want to embarrass her," I said quietly. Ethan's expression softened. "I don't think the truth is what's embarrassing here," he replied. For a second, I didn't know what to say, because deep down, I knew he was right. The embarrassment wasn't me. It was everything that had led to this moment. Still, my feet wouldn't move. Not yet. So Ethan didn't push. Instead, he turned back toward the entrance and called out to someone inside. "Mark." The best man appeared a moment later, looking both concerned and confused. "What's going on?" he asked. Ethan stepped closer to him, lowering his voice just enough that I couldn't hear everything, but I caught pieces. "Check the list again. Notes section. Who flagged her?" Mark nodded quickly and disappeared back inside. Ethan returned his attention to me. "I'm going to get answers," he said. "Right now." I swallowed. "You don't have to do this," I said again, though my voice lacked conviction this time. "Yes," he replied simply. "I do." Minutes passed. They felt longer than they should have, long enough for my thoughts to start spiraling again. What if this made things worse? What if Chloe blamed me? What if this was the moment everything broke completely? I wrapped my arms around myself tighter, trying to hold on to something steady. Then Mark reappeared. His expression was different this time, more serious, more certain. He walked straight up to Ethan and handed him his phone. "Check the email," he said quietly. Ethan took the phone, his eyes scanning the screen. I watched as his expression changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, piece by piece. Confusion, then realization, then something sharper. Anger, not explosive, not loud, but controlled, focused. The kind of anger that doesn't fade easily. He lowered the phone slowly, his jaw tightening. "What does it say?" I asked before I could stop myself. Ethan looked at me. Then without hesitation, he turned the screen so I could see. It was an email from Victoria Carter, sent to the wedding planner. The subject line was simple: guest list adjustment. My eyes moved quickly over the words: remove Angela Campbell from primary seating. Ensure she is not given access to the main ceremony. Mark as restricted if necessary. Restricted. I felt something cold settle in my chest. There it was. Clear, undeniable. Not a misunderstanding, not a miscommunication. A decision. Planned, executed, signed off. I looked away from the screen, unable to keep reading. "I didn't know it would be like this," I whispered. Ethan's voice was calm when he spoke again. "I believe you." Those 3 words hit me harder than anything else, because they weren't defensive, they weren't dismissive, they were simple, honest. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something shift inside me. Not pain, not yet, but something close to it, something that made it easier to breathe. Ethan handed the phone back to Mark, then turned fully toward me. "This isn't right," he said. I nodded faintly. "No," I agreed. He took a slow breath as if steadying himself. Then he looked back toward the open doors of the church. "I'm not going to pretend it is," he added. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what kind of foundation this marriage would be built on. Truth or silence. And Ethan had just made his choice. The air shifted again, but this time it wasn't subtle. It was sharp, immediate, like something invisible had snapped into place. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned, squared his shoulders, and walked back toward the open doors of the church with a kind of calm determination that made my chest tighten. For a split second, I thought about stopping him, about telling him to let it go, to protect Chloe's day, even if it meant protecting a lie. But the words never left my mouth, because deep down, I knew this wasn't something that could be undone quietly. Not anymore. I stayed where I was, just outside the doorway, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might echo inside the church itself. From where I stood, I could see everything now. The guests had all turned toward the entrance, their faces filled with curiosity, confusion, even discomfort. Conversations had stopped completely, and at the front, Chloe. She was still standing there in her wedding dress, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Her eyes followed Ethan as he walked back in. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before, not embarrassment, not distance, fear. Ethan reached the altar again, but he didn't hand the microphone back. Instead, he held onto it. The officiant leaned toward him, whispering something, probably asking if everything was okay. Ethan gave a small nod, but his eyes never left Chloe. "I'm sorry," he said into the microphone, his voice steady but firm, "but we need to pause for a moment." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how weddings like this were supposed to go. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he spoke again. "I just found out that someone very important to this day was deliberately kept outside." The words landed heavily. Every person in that room understood exactly what he meant. I saw Chloe's lips part slightly, her fingers tightening around her bouquet. Victoria, seated in the front row, went completely still. Her posture didn't change, her expression didn't crack, but something in her eyes sharpened, controlled, alert. Ethan continued, "And I can't stand here and pretend everything is fine when it isn't." The murmurs grew louder now, a low hum of tension spreading through the church. Someone whispered behind me, "What's going on?" I felt my pulse quicken. This was escalating, faster than I expected, farther than I ever wanted. Ethan turned slightly, his gaze moving across the room before settling very deliberately on his mother. "Mom," he said, his tone calm but unmistakably direct. "Do you want to explain why Angela Campbell isn't allowed inside this church?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air felt still. Victoria didn't respond immediately. She sat there, perfectly composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were considering how best to answer. Then slowly she stood. Every movement was precise, measured, calculated. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, her voice smooth, carrying effortlessly across the room. "Of course, a misunderstanding." That word again. I felt something tighten in my chest. Ethan didn't move. "Is it?" he asked. Victoria stepped forward slightly, her expression calm but firm. "We made certain adjustments to the guest list to ensure the event ran smoothly," she said. "These things are handled all the time in weddings of this scale." Her tone was light, dismissive, as if this were a minor detail, not something that had left a mother standing outside her daughter's wedding. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Adjustments," he repeated. "Yes," Victoria said. "Nothing personal, just practical. Nothing personal." The words stung more than I expected. Ethan let out a quiet breath, then shook his head once. "It was personal," he said. Victoria's smile faltered just for a second, then it returned. "Ethan, this is not the time for this discussion," she said, her tone sharpening slightly. "We can talk about it later." "No," he replied, "we can't." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with a clarity that made everyone fall silent again. "We're talking about it now," he continued, "because this isn't just a detail. This is Chloe's mother." All eyes turned to Chloe again. She looked frozen, caught between two forces she didn't know how to control. "Chloe," Ethan said, turning fully toward her now, "did you know about this?" The question hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Chloe's lips trembled slightly. She started, then stopped. Her eyes flicked toward Victoria, just for a second. But it was enough. Ethan saw it. Everyone saw it. I need you to answer me, he said gently but firmly. Chloe swallowed hard. I knew. Some of it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The room reacted immediately. Gasps. Whispers. A shift in energy that felt almost physical. My heart sank. Not completely, not in the way it might have before, but enough to hurt. Ethan didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. What do you mean, some of it? He asked. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think it would go this far, she said quickly. I thought it was just about seating, about keeping things simple. Simple, Ethan repeated. I didn't know they would actually stop her from coming in, she said, her voice breaking now. I swear I didn't know that. Victoria stepped forward again. That's enough, she said, her tone firmer now. This is not the place for... It is exactly the place, Ethan interrupted. His calm was still there, but now it carried weight, finality. You said this was about presentation, he continued, looking at his mother again. About standards. Victoria didn't respond. I want you to say it clearly, he added, right here, in front of everyone. A flicker of something passed through her expression, annoyance, then irritation, then something colder. This is inappropriate, she said. No, Ethan replied. What's inappropriate is pretending this is normal. The tension in the room had reached something close to unbearable. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting, watching. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he said the words that changed everything. My future mother-in-law was labeled as a restricted guest because she doesn't fit the image you wanted. The truth, plain, unfiltered, unavoidable. Victoria's composure cracked just slightly, but it was enough. That's not what this is about, she said quickly. Then, what is it about? Ethan asked. She didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she said, we were trying to protect this family's reputation. There it was, clearer than ever. And suddenly, the room shifted, not in volume, not in movement, but in perception. People understood now. This wasn't about logistics. This wasn't about organization. This was about judgment, about status, about deciding who was worthy of being seen and who wasn't. Ethan stood there for a moment, letting that truth settle. Then he lowered the microphone slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but stronger than anything he had said before. If that's the kind of foundation this marriage is supposed to be built on. He paused, looked at Chloe, then back at his mother. Then we have a much bigger problem than a seating arrangement. The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. And for the first time since this began, I realized something. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a turning point for all of us. For a moment after Ethan's words, no one moved. It was as if the entire room had been frozen in place, caught between what had been planned and what was now unfolding. I stood just outside the doorway, unsure if I still belonged where I was, or anywhere at all. Inside, Chloe looked like she couldn't breathe. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet so hard I thought the stems might snap. Her shoulders, once held so perfectly straight, had begun to tremble ever so slightly. Ethan, she whispered. Her voice was fragile, not the confident, polished tone I had heard so often lately, but something closer to the girl I used to know. Ethan turned to her slowly, his expression no longer confrontational, but not softened either. He looked at her the way someone looks when they're trying to understand something that doesn't quite fit. I need to know where you stand, he said quietly. The microphone was still in his hand, but his voice felt more personal now, like he wasn't speaking to the room anymore. He was speaking to her, to Chloe. She blinked rapidly, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want this to happen," she said quickly. "I just wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect." That word echoed in my mind. How many times had she heard it? How many times had she been told what perfect was supposed to look like? Ethan took a small step closer to her. "At what cost?" he asked. The question wasn't harsh, but it was honest. And honesty has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. Chloe's lips trembled. "I didn't think it would hurt her like this," she said, her voice breaking. I thought she would understand." Something inside me tightened at those words. Understand. That I wasn't needed, that I should stay outside, that my presence was something to be managed. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just a quiet, aching sadness. Ethan exhaled slowly, then lowered the microphone slightly, his voice softening even more. "Did you ever ask her?" he said. Chloe hesitated. "No." "Did you tell her what was happening?" Another pause. "No." Ethan nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "That's not understanding," he said gently. "That's silence." The room remained completely still. No one interrupted. No one tried to step in, because everyone could feel it now. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was something deeper, something that had been building for a long time. Chloe wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her carefully applied makeup. "I didn't know how to handle it," she admitted. "Your mom kept saying things about expectations, about how people would judge." Her voice faltered as she glanced briefly toward Victoria. "I thought if I just went along with it, everything would be easier." Easier. That word felt just as heavy as perfect. Ethan followed her gaze. Then he turned back to her, his expression steady. "Easier for who?" he asked. Chloe didn't answer, because she didn't have to. We all knew. The silence said everything. Ethan stood there for a moment, then slowly lifted the microphone again, not to speak louder, but to make sure everyone could hear what came next. "I'm going to do something now," he said, "and I need you to really think about what this means." My breath caught. Didn't know what he was about to do, but I felt it coming, something that would change everything. Ethan turned, not toward Chloe, not toward his mother, but toward the open doors, toward me. "Angela," he said, his voice carrying clearly this time. "Would you please come inside?" The words hit me like a wave. I shook my head instinctively, taking a small step back. "No, I can't," I said, my voice barely steady. "This is your moment. I don't want to." "You're already part of this moment," he said gently, "whether anyone planned for it or not." The truth in his words left me without an immediate response. Inside, I saw Chloe's eyes widen, her gaze locked onto mine again. There was no distance in it now, no detachment, just raw emotion, fear, regret, and something else, recognition. For the first time that day, I felt like she really saw me. "Mom," she whispered. The word carried across the space between us, soft, fragile, but real. I hadn't heard her say it like that in a long time. My chest tightened. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. I don't want to ruin anything I said again, though it sounded weaker now. Ethan stepped forward just enough to close the distance between the doorway and the steps. "You're not ruining anything," he said. "You're fixing something that should have never been broken." Behind him, the guests shifted again, but this time the energy was different. Less judgment, more understanding. Or maybe I was just imagining it. I didn't know. All I knew was that every instinct I had built over the past few weeks, stay small, stay quiet, stay out of the way, was now being challenged. And I didn't know how to respond. I looked at Chloe again, really looked at her. Her tears were no longer hidden. Her posture had lost its perfect composure. She looked human, vulnerable, like the daughter I used to know. "Mum, please," she said softly, "just come inside." The words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They were messy, real, and that made them mean more than anything else she could have said. I hesitated, just for a second, then another, because stepping inside that church meant more than just crossing a threshold. It meant accepting that everything had changed, that the illusion had been broken, that we were all standing in something real now, whether we were ready for it or not. But then I thought about something, about all the years I had spent showing up for her, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. And I realized this was no different. So I took a step forward, then another. Slowly, carefully, I walked up the steps and toward the open doors. Every eye in the room was on me now. I could feel it. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to shrink. I walked past Ethan, who gave me a small, reassuring nod. And then I stepped inside. The church felt different from within, larger, brighter, heavier, with expectation. I kept my gaze forward, not allowing myself to get lost in the faces around me. There was only one person I needed to see, Chloe. I stopped a few feet in front of her, close enough to see the tears on her cheeks, close enough to feel the distance that had grown between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, mother and daughter, separated by choices, reconnected by something neither of us had fully let go of. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. The words were small, but they carried everything, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else, something harder, but maybe something more honest. For a moment after Chloe's apology, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of us. Everything else, the guests, the whispers, the tension faded into the background. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice trembling as if the words had been waiting inside her for far too long. I looked at her, really looked at her, not the bride standing in front of me, but my daughter, the girl I had raised, the girl I had loved through every version of herself. And I realized something in that moment. She wasn't cold, she wasn't heartless, she was lost. "I know," I said softly. The words surprised even me, because part of me had expected anger to come rushing in, resentment, pain demanding to be heard. But instead, what I felt was something quieter, something steadier, understanding, not of what she had done, but of how she had gotten here. Chloe let out a shaky breath, her shoulders dropping slightly as if something inside her had loosened. Behind her, I could feel the weight of the room pressing in again. This moment wasn't private anymore. It never had been. And there was still something unfinished. Ethan hadn't moved far. He was still close enough to step back in, still holding the space open for what needed to happen next. He lifted the microphone again, but this time his tone was different, less confrontational, more resolved. "There's something else everyone here needs to understand," he said. The room fell silent once more. Victoria shifted slightly in her seat. I didn't need to look at her to know she was preparing herself. Ethan glanced at Mark, who stepped forward again, holding his phone. The message that led to this situation wasn't a misunderstanding. Ethan continued. It was a decision. He took the phone from Mark and held it up, not dramatically, bling, not for effect, but simply as proof. "This email was sent to the wedding planner 3 days ago." He paused, then read directly from it. "Please remove Angela Campbell from the primary seating list. If necessary, restrict access to the ceremony to avoid complications." A ripple of shock moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. Ethan lowered the phone slightly. "That wasn't a suggestion," he said. "That was an instruction." For the first time, Victoria's composure visibly cracked. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there, a tightening around her eyes, a stiffness in her posture. "This is inappropriate," she said, standing again, her voice sharper now. "Private correspondence should not be private," Ethan interrupted. He didn't raise his voice, but there was steel in it now. "You made a decision that affected everyone in this room," he said, "especially Chloe, especially Angela." Victoria took a step forward, her expression hardening. "I made a decision to protect this family," she said, "to ensure that today reflects who we are." "And who exactly is that?" Ethan asked. The question hung in the air. Victoria didn't hesitate. "A family with standards," she replied. There it was again, standards. But this time it didn't sound refined. It sounded hollow. Ethan let out a slow breath. "And Angela doesn't meet those standards?" he asked. Victoria's silence was answer enough. The room reacted again, this time more audibly. Whispers spreading, heads shaking, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Because now, it wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't implied. It was out in the open. Chloe turned slowly toward Victoria, her face pale. "You told me this was about keeping things simple," she said, her voice unsteady. "You said it wasn't personal." Victoria softened her expression slightly, turning her attention back to Chloe. "Sweetheart, I was trying to help you," she said. "You didn't need unnecessary distractions on your wedding day." "My mum is not a distraction," Chloe said. The words came out stronger than anything she had said so far. Clear, firm, and for a moment, I saw the girl I used to know again. Victoria's expression tightened. "You're emotional right now," she said calmly. "You'll understand later." "No," Chloe replied, shaking her head. "I understand now." The shift in her voice was undeniable. Something had changed. Something had broken through. Ethan watched her closely as if waiting to see where she would go next. Chloe turned toward me again, her eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there now. Resolve. "I let this happen," she said. "I didn't stop it. I didn't respond immediately, because I knew that was the truth she needed to say. Not for me, for herself. I thought if I just went along with it, everything would be easier," she continued. "But I didn't realize what I was giving up." Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt my throat tighten again, because I knew exactly what she meant. Not just the wedding, not just the moment, but something deeper, something we had built over years. Ethan stepped slightly closer, his voice gentle but steady. "You don't get to build a future by erasing the past," he said. Chloe nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. Victoria let out a quiet, frustrated breath. "This is getting out of hand," she said. "We are in the middle of a ceremony." Ethan turned to her again. "No," he said. "We're in the middle of a decision." The distinction was clear and final. He looked at Chloe. "I need to know something," he said. "Right now." Chloe met his gaze, her expression fragile but open. "If we go forward with this wedding," he continued, "it has to be built on something real." He paused, then asked the question that changed everything. "Are you choosing that?" The room held its breath. Chloe didn't answer immediately. She looked at me, then at Victoria, then back at Ethan, and in that moment, I could see the weight of everything she was carrying: expectation, fear, love, shame, all of it colliding at once. Finally, she spoke. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I am." Ethan didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, he nodded once. Then he turned back toward the room. "Then we start with the truth," he said. And just like that, the illusion that had held everything together began to fall away, not in chaos, not in anger, but in clarity. And for the first time since this day began, I felt something shift inside me. Not just pain, not just relief, but something else. Something that felt like the beginning of healing, even if we didn't know yet what that would look like. The silence that followed Chloe's answer didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate, like something important had just been set into motion and everyone in that room knew it. No one spoke, no one interrupted. Because for the first time since the ceremony began, the truth had taken its place at the center of it. Ethan lowered the microphone slightly, his eyes still on Chloe. There was no anger in his expression now, no frustration, just a quiet intensity. "Then there's something else I need to say," he added. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It always had. And this time, every person in that church leaned in just a little more to listen. Ethan turned not toward his mother this time, but toward the front row where his father sat. "Dad," he said, "can you stand for a moment?" "Robert?" Carter looked surprised. He hadn't spoken at all since this began. He had remained still composed, watching everything unfold with a quiet seriousness that hadn't gone unnoticed. Slowly he stood. "What is it, son?" he asked. Ethan stepped closer, his tone softening slightly. "I need you to look at Angela," he said. The request seemed simple, but the weight behind it was anything but. Robert turned his head, his gaze moved toward me. For a moment, there was nothing in his expression but polite acknowledgement, recognition in the most basic sense. But then something changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight narrowing of his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, confusion, then curiosity, and finally, something that looked like memory. He started, his voice trailing off. He took a step forward, his attention now fully focused on me. "Have we met before?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I blinked, unsure how to respond. "I don't think so," I said carefully. But even as I said it, something in his expression made me hesitate. He studied my face more closely now. Not the way Victoria had, not with judgment, but with searching, as if he were trying to piece something together that had been buried for a long time. Ethan watched him quietly. "Think about it," he said gently. "A hospital. About 15 years ago." Robert's brow furrowed. "A hospital," he repeated. Then his eyes widened slightly, and I saw it. The moment it clicked. "You were there," he said slowly, his voice filled with something close to disbelief. "After the accident." My heart skipped. Accident? For a second I didn't understand, then memory rushed back all at once. A night shift, rain pounding against the windows, an emergency call coming in severe injuries, critical condition. A man brought in unconscious, barely holding on. I had been part of that team. I had stayed longer than my shift, watched over him when others had rotated out, talked to him even when he couldn't respond. "Stay with us," I had whispered more than once. "Don't give up." I hadn't known his name then. I hadn't needed to. "I remember," I said quietly. Robert let out a slow breath, his expression shifting from recognition to something deeper. Gratitude. "You stayed with me," he said. "All night." I nodded faintly. "It was my job." "No," he said firmly. "It wasn't just your job." The room had gone completely silent again, even more so than before, because this no one had expected. "You talked to me," Robert continued, "even when the doctors weren't sure I could hear you." I felt my throat tighten. "I always assume people can," I said softly. He let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "They told me later," he said, "about a nurse who refused to leave, who kept checking on me even after her shift ended." My chest felt heavy now, not with pain, but with something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition, not for what I had done as a mother, but for who I had been outside of that. I never got your name, Robert added. I didn't think it mattered, I replied. It did, he said. More than you know. Victoria shifted in her seat, her composure finally showing real cracks. What is this about? She asked, her voice tight. But no one answered her, because everyone was watching Robert, listening. Ethan stepped closer again. That man you're talking about, he said quietly, is my father. The words settled over the room like a revelation. I felt my breath catch. You're his son, I asked, looking at Ethan. He nodded. Yes. I looked back at Robert, trying to reconcile the memory in my mind with the man standing in front of me now. You recovered well, I said, almost instinctively. He smiled faintly. Thanks to you. Victoria stood abruptly this time. This is completely irrelevant, she said sharply. What happened years ago has nothing to do with, it has everything to do with this, Ethan interrupted. His voice was calm again, but firm, unshakable. You dismissed Angela because she didn't fit your idea of what this family should look like, he continued. But you didn't bother to ask who she actually is. Victoria's expression hardened. I know exactly who she is, she said. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he replied. You knew what you wanted to see. The distinction cut through the room, clear, undeniable. Robert stepped forward again, his gaze still on me. You saved my life, he said. I shook my head slightly. I was part of a team, but you were the one who stayed, he insisted. His voice softened. I don't remember everything from that night, he admitted, but I remember your voice. Something in my chest tightened again, not painfully, but deeply. You'd told me not to give up, he said. I felt tears sting my eyes. I say that to all my patients, I replied. He smiled faintly. Well, it worked. A small ripple of emotion moved through the room, not loud, but real. Victoria didn't speak again, because for the first time, there was nothing she could say. The narrative she had built, the image she had protected, had just been dismantled by something she couldn't control. Truth. Ethan turned back toward me, his expression softer now. You weren't just someone standing outside, he said. You were someone this family should have been honoring. The words settled into me slowly. I didn't know how to respond, because I hadn't come here for recognition. I hadn't come here to be acknowledged. I had come simply to see my daughter. But now, everything had changed, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't standing on the outside anymore. For a long moment after Robert's words, no one in the church spoke. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from confusion anymore. It was something else, something heavier, something that forced everyone in that room to sit with what had just been revealed. I stood there just a few steps inside the aisle, feeling the weight of it settle around me, not like a spotlight, not like attention, but like truth finally taking up space. Chloe hadn't moved. Her eyes were still fixed on me, but now they were filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, not fear, not distance, but clarity. And with it, regret. Mom, she said again, her voice softer this time, almost breaking under the weight of everything she was feeling. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw her not as the woman who had pushed me away, but as someone who had been trying, failing to hold two worlds together, and losing herself in the process. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't believe her, but because I knew this moment mattered, not just for us, but for her. She needed to say it, to face it. I let them tell me what was right, she continued, glancing briefly toward Victoria before looking back at me. I let them make me feel like I had to choose between where I came from and where I was going. Her voice cracked on the last words. and I chose wrong. The honesty in that moment hit me harder than anything else had, because it wasn't defensive, it wasn't hidden, it was raw and real. Ethan stepped slightly closer, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about choosing sides," he said. "It's about choosing what kind of life we're going to build." Chloe nodded slowly, wiping her tears with unsteady hands. "I know," she whispered. Then she turned back to me, and something shifted again. Not in the room, but in her. She took a small step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of me, closer than she had been in months. "Mum, I need to say this properly," she said. Her voice was still shaking, but there was something else there now. Courage. "I didn't just let this happen," she continued. "I participated in it. The words were hard, I could see that, but she didn't look away. I ignored your calls," she said. "I avoided talking to you because I didn't want to face how wrong it felt. I felt my chest tighten again, not from pain, but from hearing the truth spoken out loud. I told myself it was temporary," she went on, "that once the wedding was over, things would go back to normal." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But I didn't realize that normal doesn't come back when you break something like this." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, and I broke it. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, because there was nothing left to uncover, no misunderstanding, no confusion, just truth standing between us. "I thought I was becoming someone better," Chloe added softly, "but I was just becoming someone who forgot where she came from." I took a slow breath. And finally, I stepped forward too, closing the distance between us. "You didn't forget," I said gently. She looked up at me, surprised. "You just got lost," I continued. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere steady, because I knew that feeling, not in the same way, but enough to recognize it. Chloe let out a small broken sound, a mix between a sob and a breath, and suddenly she reached for me, not cautiously, not carefully, but completely. She wrapped her arms around me, holding on as if she was afraid I might disappear. And for a second, I froze. Not because I didn't want to hug her back, but because I hadn't felt that kind of closeness from her in so long. I didn't know how to react. Then my arms moved on their own, wrapping around her, holding her the way I used to when she was a child, firm, steady, safe. She buried her face against my shoulder, her body shaking slightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. "I know," I said, softly. We stayed like that for a moment. Not long, but long enough for something to begin mending, not fixed, not completely, but started. When she pulled back, her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smudged, but she didn't try to hide it. For the first time that day, she looked real. Not perfect, not polished, just herself. Ethan stepped forward again, his expression calm but focused. "What happens next matters," he said. Chloe nodded slowly. "I know." He looked at her carefully. "I'm not asking you to choose between your mother and my family," he continued. "I'm asking you to decide what you're willing to accept." The distinction was clear and important. Chloe turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward Victoria. Her expression changed again, not angry, not defensive, but resolved. "I'm not going to pretend this is okay," she said. Victoria stood still, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. "You're making a mistake," she said coolly. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment." Chloe shook her head. "No," she replied. "I'm finally seeing clearly." The room seemed to lean into that moment, waiting, watching. Chloe took a slow breath, then said the words that changed everything again. "If this wedding continues, it's going to be on different terms." Victoria's expression hardened. "What does that mean?" she asked. Chloe didn't hesitate. "It means my mother sits in the front row," she said. Her voice was steady now, strong. It means she is acknowledged, not hidden. A murmur spread through the room, not shocked this time, but supportive. Quietly, subtly, Chloe continued. And it means I'm not building my future on something that required me to erase my past. The words landed with clarity, finality. Victoria didn't respond immediately because for the first time, she didn't have control over the outcome. Ethan watched Chloe for a moment, then nodded. Okay, he said simply, not dramatic, not grand, but enough. Enough to confirm that he stood with her. Chloe turned back to me, her expression softer now, hopeful. Will you stay? She asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything, not just about the ceremony, but about us. I looked at her, at the daughter I had raised, at the woman she was becoming, and I realized something. This moment wasn't about what had been taken, it was about what could still be rebuilt. I'll stay, I said quietly, and for the first time that day, it felt like the right place to be. After Chloe's words settled over the room, something shifted, not abruptly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt steady, like the foundation beneath everything had been reset, no longer built on appearances, but on something real. For a moment, no one moved. Then quietly, the wedding coordinator stepped forward from the side aisle, her expression uncertain but attentive. Would you like us to adjust the seating? She asked gently. Her voice was careful, respectful, as if she understood that this moment required more than just logistics. Chloe nodded immediately. Yes, she said, please. There was no hesitation in her tone now, no second guessing, just clarity. The coordinator gave a small nod and began signaling to a few staff members who moved discreetly through the front rows, speaking quietly to guests. I felt a wave of discomfort rise in me. People were being asked to move, seats were shifting, all because of me. I don't want to cause more disruption, I said softly, glancing at Chloe. She shook her head quickly. You're not, she replied. This should have been done from the beginning. Her voice was calm but firm, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Ethan stepped closer as well, offering a small, reassuring smile. It's just a seat, he said. But it matters. I nodded faintly, because I understood what he meant. It wasn't about where I sat. It was about whether I was meant to be there at all. Within a few minutes, the adjustments were complete. A seat in the very front row directly across from where Chloe would stand was now open. The coordinator turned back to us. Whenever you're ready, she said. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to sit there, but because part of me still wasn't sure I belonged in that space. So many years of trying not to take up too much room don't disappear in a single moment. But then Chloe reached for my hand, her fingers wrapped around mine, warm and steady. Come on, she said softly. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Not just affection, trust. I let out a small breath, then nodded. Together we walked down the short distance to the front row. Every step felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but emotionally. I could feel the eyes of the guests on us, some curious, some sympathetic, some quietly approving. But none of them mattered. Not really, because all I could focus on was the feeling of my daughter's hand in mine. When we reached the seat, Chloe paused. She looked at me for a moment, her expression soft but serious. I should have done this from the start, she said. I squeezed her hand gently. You're doing it now, I replied. That was enough, for both of us. She nodded, then released my hand slowly. I sat down. The chair felt solid beneath me, real, grounding. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of something. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Chloe turned and walked back to her place at the front. Ethan met her there, his expression calm, steady. The officiant cleared his throat softly, glancing between them. "Shall we continue?" he asked. Ethan looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at Ethan. And this time, there was no hesitation. "Yes," they said together. The word carried through the room with a quiet certainty. The ceremony resumed, but everything felt different now, not staged, not controlled, but honest. When Chloe walked down the aisle again, this time fully properly, I watched her in a way I hadn't been able to before, not from a distance, not through glass, but up close. Her dress moved softly with each step, the fabric catching the light. Her expression wasn't perfect. Her eyes were still slightly red from tears. But there was something in her face that hadn't been there earlier. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going according to plan, but the kind that comes from knowing you've made the right choice. When she reached the front, Ethan took her hands gently, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other, not performing, not pretending, just present. The officiant began again, his voice steady as he spoke the familiar words. But this time they carried more weight, because now everyone understood what it had taken to get here. When it came time for the vows, Ethan spoke first. His voice was calm, but filled with something deeper. "I promise to build a life with you that is honest," he said, "even when the truth is uncomfortable." Chloe's eyes filled with tears again. "And I promise to stand with you," he continued, "not just when things are easy, but when they're real." Chloe nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around his. Then it was her turn. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I promise to never lose sight of who I am," she said, "or where I come from." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't stop. "And I promise to choose truth, even when it's hard." The words hung in the air, simple but powerful, because they weren't just vows to each other. They were promises to themselves, to the life they were choosing to build. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room filled with applause, not the polite kind, but something warmer, something more genuine. As they kissed, I felt tears slip down my cheeks, not from sadness, not even from relief, but from something deeper, something that had been broken, beginning to heal. After the ceremony, guests began to stand, moving toward the aisle. Conversation started again, but the tone had shifted, less superficial, more grounded. I remained seated for a moment, letting it all settle. Then Chloe turned and walked straight toward me, not hesitating, not holding back. She wrapped her arms around me again this time, without fear, without distance. "I'm really glad you're here," she whispered. I held her tightly. "So am I," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it without reservation. The reception was held in a ballroom just a few blocks from the church. By the time I arrived, the sun had already begun to set, casting a warm golden light through the tall windows. Everything inside was exactly what Victoria had envisioned: elegant centerpieces, polished silverware, soft music drifting through the air. Perfect. But something about it felt different now, not because the decorations had changed, but because the meaning behind the day had. I stood near the entrance for a moment, unsure of where to go. Old habits don't disappear overnight, even after everything that had happened. Part of me still felt like I needed to stay out of the way. But before I could step back, Chloe appeared beside me. "You're not hiding anymore," she said gently. I turned toward her. She had changed out of her ceremony veil, her hair now falling softly around her shoulders. Her makeup had been touched up, but her eyes still carried the truth of earlier, no longer trying to conceal anything. "I'm not hiding," I said lightly. She raised an eyebrow. "Mom," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Okay, maybe a little." She reached for my hand again. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight you stay." There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just quiet determination. And for the first time, I didn't question it. All right, I said. She smiled, really smiled, and led me further into the room. Guests were already gathering around the tables, their conversations low but lively. Some glanced in our direction, recognizing me now not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged there. It was a subtle shift, but I felt it. Ethan joined us a moment later, his tie loosened slightly, his posture more relaxed than it had been all day. Angela, he said warmly, I'm glad you came. I almost didn't, I admitted. He nodded. I'm glad you did anyway. There was something steady about him, not just in the way he spoke, but in the way he carried himself. He had made a choice earlier that day, one that hadn't been easy, and he hadn't backed down from it. That mattered, more than I could fully put into words. Thank you, I said quietly. He didn't ask what I meant, he just nodded. As the evening continued, things settled into something almost normal. There was laughter, music, clinking glasses. But underneath it all, there was a different kind of awareness, like everyone had witnessed something real, something that couldn't be ignored. At one point, Robert approached me. He looked more relaxed now, his earlier intensity softened. I've been meaning to thank you properly, he said. You already did, I replied gently. He shook his head. Not enough. He paused for a moment, then added, What you did, it changed everything for me. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said the only thing that felt honest. I'm just glad you're here today, I said. He smiled. So am I. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then he said something I didn't expect. You raised a good daughter, he said. The words caught me off guard, not because I didn't believe them, but because of everything that had happened. I think she's still figuring that out, I replied. He nodded. Aren't we all? Later in the evening, the music shifted and people began gathering near the dance floor. Chloe and Ethan shared their first dance, moving slowly together under the soft lights. I watched from my seat, my hands resting quietly in my lap. There was no bitterness in me anymore, no lingering anger, just a quiet sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. After their dance, Chloe made her way toward the microphone. My heart tightened slightly. Another speech. Another moment where anything could happen. She looked out at the room, her gaze steady. Then she found me and held it. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, she said. A few soft chuckles moved through the crowd. But I think I need to. Her voice was calm, grounded. This day didn't go the way I expected, she continued. But I think it went the way it needed to. There was a murmur of agreement. She took a small breath. I spent a long time trying to become someone I thought I had to be, she said. Someone who fit into a certain image, a certain expectation. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Victoria, who sat quietly at her table, her expression unreadable. But in doing that, I almost lost something that mattered more than any of that. Chloe looked back at me. My mum? She said simply. The room fell quiet again. I thought I could balance everything, she continued, keep everyone happy, avoid conflict. She shook her head slightly, but all I really did was hurt the person who never asked me to be anything other than myself. My throat tightened. And I'm sorry for that, she said, her voice softening. She didn't need to say more, not for me, not for anyone. Because the truth had already been spoken. Chloe smiled faintly, then looked out at the room again. So tonight I just want to say thank you, she said, to everyone who showed up, honestly. Her gaze returned to Ethan. And to my husband, she added a small smile forming, for reminding me what that looks like. Ethan smiled back at her, not broadly, but with quiet pride. Chloe stepped away from the microphone, the room filling with applause, not loud, not overwhelming, but real. As the evening continued, I found myself sitting back, watching it all unfold, not as an outsider, not as someone trying to stay unseen, but as part of it, fully, completely. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything. I didn't need to be refined or polished or invisible. I just needed to be there, and that was enough. Later, as the night began to wind down, Chloe came and sat beside me. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, just like she used to when she was younger. "I missed this," she said softly. I smiled. So did I. We sat there for a while, not saying much. We didn't need to, because sometimes silence doesn't mean distance. Sometimes it means everything is finally where it should be. And for the first time in a very long time, it was. Sometimes the deepest wounds in a family don't come from hatred. They come from silence pressure and the fear of not being enough. Angela's story reminds us that love doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It waits, quietly, patiently, hoping to be seen again. Chloe didn't stop loving her mother. She just lost herself trying to fit into a world that told her she had to choose. But real strength isn't about choosing status over family. It's about having the courage to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And sometimes healing doesn't begin with a perfect moment. It begins with one honest decision to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to finally say, "This matters." If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt pushed aside by someone you love or had to fight to be seen again? Leave a comment and share your experience. And if you believe in stories about family forgiveness and emotional strength, don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone.